Hello, everyone, and welcome to our World AIDS Day panel hosted by myself, London Bradshaw, a Stream Queens member here, one of the drag partners here on Twitch. For World AIDS Day, one of the colors that is celebrated on this day, or recognized on this day, excuse me, should I say, is red. So I have a lovely panel of humans wearing red to recognize World AIDS Day. We are here today. I'm as an Empress, Olympia 50, what you all voted for those who live in my area. I'm here graced with 3 other Empresses and a lovely Imperial Prince, Debit. I'll let them introduce themselves really quickly, and then we'll get going with this panel. We're going to start with Brian Steen, aka Mary Lubelot. Who are you, and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Brian Steen. I'm also Olympia 46, Mary Lubelot Peters. I am an HIV positive gay male who has been living with HIV for the last 6+ years. And I am just really excited to be here tonight.
Thank you. Happy to have you. I'm glad you said yes. Thanks for doing this. Up next is Geisha Star. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, everyone. My name is Geisha Star. My pronouns are she and her. I was actually fortunate to be a panelist last year, so thanks for having me back. I've been HIV positive for over 20 years and have used my drag persona and platform to now do trans prevention, or actually trans awareness, both here in Seattle and locally.
Awesome. Thank you, Geisha. Geisha is also one of my mentors for the year of being Empress, so thank you as well for doing that. Thank you for being here. Up next, we have Debit Rockefeller, one of my best friends here in Seattle, also a Imperial Prince. Hi, Debit. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing this evening? My name is Debit Rockefeller. I am Imperial Prince 46, the Imperial Court of Seattle. I am also HIV positive. I was diagnosed in 2003. And I have been very fortunate to be, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it anyhow. And I'm happy to be here. Sorry.
Thank you,
I got nervous
Debit.
for a second.
No, you're totally fine. Thank you for being here. And then we have one of the icon legends, one of the longest running drag shows in the Pacific Northwest, is run by the one and only Lady Chablis. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? And how's everybody else out there? As London says, my name is Howard Russell, aka Lady Chablis. I was what was I? Empress of Seattle. I was Empress 49. I got the opportunity to crown you, London, which has been an exciting year. I have been working in the HIV and AIDS arena for over 15 years, and I also work for an organization called AIDS Health Foundation. And I've been working there for over 5 years now. So that's basically who I am.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for working in that arena. I really appreciate it. I saw when I put this panel together, it was because you are all very educated in the awareness of HIV and AIDS here in not only Seattle, but the platforms that you all make, whether you are a drag artist or a local community member or someone in the health field of HIV and AIDS awareness. So I'm glad that you all were here. Before we move into the questions that I have for you, we have time allotted at the end for anybody in the chat who would like to give questions. They will remain anonymous unless you choose to, but this is a sensitive subject, not only in the world, but on Twitch as well. So these panelists are already aware that they so choose to pass on questions that are given by you in the chat, just because it is a sensitive subject. But we want to have a good time here. We want to make sure that everybody's aware of HIV and AIDS awareness, and what we can do to educate ourselves better if we're not already educated enough. As well as we do have a fundraiser for AMFAR down below here on the window. So we already reached our goal of $542, but that does not mean that we can't keep donating to make sure that we have the money that we need to make sure that we do find the right research, or we donate to the right research funds, as well as I said, Chablis works for AIDS Health Foundation. So please, 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 if you have any more spare dollars, make sure you donate as well. So going right along, I just have a simple question for everybody, and anybody can answer. I will kind of start in order. What is the difference between HIV and AIDS, and is there a difference? This is just me asking you, so we want to make sure that the chat is aware and well educated. So we can start with Brian, aka Mary Lou Bellot.
Gosh, I think that we, I think that that's a really important question, because we throw around the HIV and AIDS as almost a synonymous term these days, but they're not. I'm going to keep it as simple as I can. As HIV is the virus that causes AIDS. So I'm an HIV positive male. I do not have AIDS. It's not two totally separate things, but it's not like you get HIV and then all of a sudden you have AIDS. Yeah, that's all. That's as simple as I can make it.
Well, thank you, thank you. Does anybody else have any other extra input to that question, Chablis?
Well, I know that it has changed. The numbers, your viral load has changed through the CDC in so many levels. I know it. If you're under 200, and I think that's a bit lower than that, that would be considered as having AIDS. So that's where the CDC has its line at, as far as what's considered to be AIDS. But that changes so much, though, and that just depends on basically what your levels are.
And if it's appropriate for me to ask, when discussing levels, what does that look like, or how does someone identify what level they may be at? If
well, seeing a physician, when they do blood draws and blood tests, they can see exactly where that is at right now. I mean, we live in a world right now where things have changed so much that I believe we very rarely see people who are diagnosed up under that 200 mark. And that's because the medication has made so many changes now that people are becoming more undetected. And by being undetected, that means they're not showing enough. The viruses in them are so low right now that let me start all over. The virus is so low right now that they can't really detect it. So you can't really pass on that virus to anyone else that's out there because it's extremely low. And that's due to the medications that people are taking now.
So the correct word then is undetected, which I know that Geisha had mentioned before we had started, that there are certain words that are used that are a stigma, either like correct to use, correct not to use. Geisha, did you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I know Geisha or Chablis just mentioned undetectable, undetected when taking medication and seeing a physician, and they decide that. But I know that you had mentioned there are words to use and not to use. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, and I think the biggest thing to really encourage all of the viewers is to get your STI checks at least twice a year, if not quarterly. Knowing your status will definitely help get you on the path to getting on the correct meds and getting regular blood draws to really kind of make sure, along with other STIs. It's very funny because my doctor is actually next to Howard's or Lady Chablis' office in Madison Street here on First Hill. And I'm very lucky that I've been able to have healthcare benefits, but there are free clinics as well and other resources available. But knowing your status is the first thing that I would encourage anyone to know so you can get on the right treatment. I think the biggest stigma is, we all swipe, we're all on apps. And the hardest thing that has not changed so much, maybe in the gay community, but at least for people that are either bi or trans curious or in the straight community, is when they're using words like clean. I think that when you're looking at a profile and it's saying, I'm looking for someone clean, or, no fats, femmes, or whatever they're saying about no Asians, it still is a sting that it's reminding of how much work we still have to do to really educate people that just because you are HIV positive or have any type of STI, you can still lead a healthy life.
And may I interject? I would say to kind of back up here for a second. So I was diagnosed in 2003. I am fully open about the fact that I am a recovering meth addict. In 2006, I went into the hospital, and my viral load was, 150,000 plus my CD4s, which is the white blood cell count, was like 115, and I had an AIDS diagnosis. And with the right care and the right health and taking the right medication and getting off drugs, I was able to move myself from having an AIDS diagnosis back to being HIV positive and working my way to being undetectable. And so I want to kind of make sure that as we're talking about this, that because you're HIV doesn't mean you're going to get AIDS, but it also means that if you go along the lines of getting an AIDS diagnosis, it doesn't mean that you're going to stay in an AIDS diagnosis. It means that with the right work and the help of medical professionals, you can move back to being HIV positive and working towards being undetectable. And so I wanted to kind of clarify that with regards to numbers and the difference between HIV and AIDS.
So you're saying that someone could have an AIDS diagnosis, but with the right medicine, they could go back to having an HIV
Correct.
diagnosis? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was
That
correct.
is correct. Yep.
That is something that I actually wasn't aware of. So thank you for
Yep.
this is why we're having this panel, because we want to make
Yep.
sure that people are educated. And obviously, someone who's moderating this panel, I did not know that. So myself, thanks to you.
Yep. Well, the other thing too is that AIDS is a conglomeration of medical diagnosis, like Kaposi sarcoma, the breaking down of the liver and the kidneys. All of those fall within the AIDS diagnosis, and AIDS is just kind of like an umbrella term for all these medical conditions that are caused because you have HIV. The virus has attacked the body so much that you have these medical diagnoses that fall under this umbrella called AIDS, because you don't have the white blood cells to combat it. And so that's kind of the definitive difference between HIV and AIDS. HIV is a virus. AIDS are all the complications that come from the virus and the virus not being checked medically with prescriptions and doctors and so forth.
Got it. So besides prescriptions from physicians and so on, before we move to our next question, I do want to just go off topic just a little bit. What are ways to stay healthy? That wasn't a question that I had brought into you, but now I'm curious if there is working out, right? Food, is that something that goes under the radar of staying
Well, just not having HIV, you still need to stay healthy, and that's exercise and do all the other stuff that needs to go on. You live your life every single day like it's a normal life. It's just a life. All you do is you have a virus, and now to this day it's a controllable virus. And so basically you do all the stuff that needs to be done, all the stuff that you can do. There's no booklet that says you have to stop living your life a certain way because you have this. The main thing in this whole point is you take your medication as your doctor prescribes it, and that's what keeps you in that level being undetected. So
thank you. So skipping around to the questions, I want to ask you all, how does HIV affect or impact, the LGBTQIA plus community? I know, Geisha, you had just mentioned We People Swipe. There are people on certain apps that have the verbiage, and that's important, is using the correct verbiage and knowing the verbiage. Is there any other things that are impactful in the LGBTQIA plus community that are not necessarily correct, or are stigmas that shouldn't be used? Or
I think,
go ahead, Geisha.
and I think from my perspective, I came out in 1993. So I think each generation in the LGBT community has a different relationship. and a different point of view to HIV/AIDS. I came out right at the tail end of when everybody was dying because there wasn't a cure, there wasn't any medication. A lot of my drag foundation and fundraising and pageantry was really to raise money and awareness. I remember going to shows and doing volunteer work at Bailey Boucher, which is the AIDS hospice here in Madison Valley in Seattle, and people were just dying. And now the progression between 1993 now to almost 2023 has really shown over those 3 decades how much, to both of our all of our panelists' points, you can live with this status and lead a healthy life. I think it's just unfortunate that over 30 years we still haven't found a cure.
So adding on to what Geisha was saying, I mean, let's really take it back in time. 1980s was a death sentence for anyone who was HIV positive. They didn't have any medications for it. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to cure it. I mean, we had Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan in office at the time. It was just a lot of things that was happening. I'm very proud of where we came from the 1980s to where we are today, as Geisha was mentioning earlier, is that the fact is that modern medicine has made a big change with people who are HIV positive, extremely big change in there. And that's now they're more concerned now about people living way too long, because now we're getting to the age where people who have had it since the 1980s who are still living, and now they're getting older. And so they're in that age, at that stigma right now. Well, I shouldn't say stigma, but in that situation right now. So, 1980s was a very hard time for the LGBT community. I mean, extremely hard for the LGBT community, because again, as Geisha mentioned, even in the 90s, people were just dying off left and right. I mean, once you got it, it was basically, you had so many months to live. That's how bad it was back in those particular days. So, but this has made a complete change to where we are today in 2022. So,
and it's not only that, but like even in 87, 88. So my uncle was diagnosed with HIV and he died of AIDS. They had AZT, and AZT was very damaging for people who are HIV because it was a new drug. It was, they had a lot of new drugs that they were just trying to see if anything would work, and it was basically giving people, chemotherapy in a pill. And so it was very struggling for the first, I would say 9-10 years. When the very beginning we had C. Everett Koop. I remember when I told my mom I was gay at 14, she got me the C. Everett Koop HIV gay pamphlet book. And it was all kinds of misinformation that we know now, but back then that was what they knew, and that was what they were kind of working off, and it was devastating. It was really hard for a lot of people in our communities.
Can I add on to what Deborah was saying about the medication on top of that, if that's okay?
Of course.
Deborah's 100% correct, because they were trying out everything they could to be able to control this virus in some way. It was AZT was one of the medications they were taking. They were giving people what they call cocktails, which means they were taking 10, 15, 20 pills a day to try to stop it. And what effect did that have? You had people who had the most worst side effects behind it. If you saw people who had the big bellies, or the people who had the extra skin on their back of their necks, and it was just incredible how people are going through a lot just taking the medication they had back then. But now, instead of taking cocktails where you had 20 or something pills in there, you only take one pill. Now we have to say you take one pill a day. That's it, right? One pill a day, and that's it. We even have now where we have medications where people go in, instead of taking a pill a day, they just take a shot. They get a shot. That shot will last them for 2 months. They go back and they take another shot. So times have definitely changed, and with less side effects too. So you just see that times have completely changed since then.
Thank you. Mary, is there anything you wanted to add on as well?
I think it's just to kind of reiterate the point of like how things have changed. I want to make this very clear that if you become HIV positive, this is not a death sentence for you. We talked a lot about how our friends of us 5 in here, ones that we know are no longer with us because they got HIV in the late 80s and early 90s, and we did not have the technology we have today. So I just wanted to make sure that fear isn't out there to everybody here on this call of, yes, HIV will change your life, but it's not a death sentence. I know we all know folks who were told back in the 80s when they found out they were positive they were told to live your life, spend your money, you're going to be dead next week. I know Olympia 16 was told that, my drag mom, and here he is 30 years later living a healthy life. So I really just wanted we talked a lot about death and how people would die in this, and I know that scares people. It scared me when I first found that I was positive, because my mindset said, I have this disease now, I'm going to be dead soon, which is not the case.
Well, that also brings me to my next question, and this is a very sensitive question. And again, if anybody doesn't feel like disclosing it, how does HIV and AIDS, or HIV in this case, affect you? And maybe an example question, like when you found out that you were diagnosed to now where you are in life, what the difference was between now and then, if you're willing to share. And if you're not, again, it's totally fine. We can go back up into the circle and start with Geisha, if you don't mind. That's where it's.
When I found out I was HIV positive, I think by then I had already been doing drag 10 plus years. And because I was doing so much fundraising and because so many people I knew was positive, and starting to begin to lead a semi-healthy life at that time with the medications available, it was a little bit, I was desensitized by it. I almost thought during my gay years that I was going to get it anyway. I don't want to say I was looking for it, but I thought, well, eventually, based on some of the decisions I had made at the time in my life, I was going to get it. And so it was almost expected. And then when I finally did get the treatment and the healthcare, and took advantage of my healthcare benefits, I was able to kind of gain a little bit more confidence that it was controllable. And it made it not so scary. And then when I came out transgender and started to really look at how the medications I'm on with my hormones and how my body and my life was changing, and now, I'm fully transitioned, the relationship I have with HIV/AIDS has definitely changed. It reminds me, and I said this, a little bit ago, the men that I meet, particularly two that I've met over the last few years, the straight community or straight identified community, it reminds me how much work there still has to do in that community. One person I, have not disclosed my status to, because I think that would change a lot between us, and we're not regular or anything, but we're regular enough that I know that if I was to say it, I don't know how he would be accepting to that. So I just have to be very careful that we don't do anything at risk or makes him feel that it was risky. And then another person I told, and he said, I can't do this. And we broke up. So it's hard navigating it outside of the LGBT community.
Thank you, Geisha, and thank you for sharing your story. I really appreciate that. I think that it's very kind for people to share their stories. So if anybody else is willing to answer the question as well, again, it does not have to be answered. We can move on to the next question as well.
I can go. I'm happy to. I think that there's a vast difference between when I was diagnosed almost 20 years ago. I did think it was a life sentence. I was dating someone, and I told them and sorry, not a life sentence, but a death sentence. I told them, and they immediately broke up with me and said that they could not have a relationship with me. And I was the first person I actually told that I was HIV. And that was devastating. And what I have to say, what I've learned over the years more than anything is part of me having consensual sex is me being open and honest about my sexual history and being honest about my sexual past, and that I'm HIV positive. Now, does that mean I do it for every Tom, Dick, and Harry? No, but if I'm doing like a trick or someone I'm meeting, then it's going to be protected, or at least we're going to have a conversation about being on PrEP, or so it's for me, it's about being comfortable enough to have enough self-care and self-love to have that conversation around consent, because I'm consenting to have a relationship or a sexual relationship with you. You need to be able to make an informed consent by having information about who I am and my sexual past. I think that's the difference between where I was and where I am now. It's about consent. And me telling you allows you to make that decision about consent, whether or not you're going to have sex with me. I think that's part of that relationship.
But not to also make it so heavy, London and everyone. I do see in the gay community a lot of friends, one positive, one negative, dating. I see that a lot of people, and Chablis was chatting about this before we went live about PrEP, that there are ways for somebody that is negative to be able to be in a relationship, either sexually or intimately committed, and still have that self-care that is important, so that it doesn't feel like it is a relationship death sentence.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you, Geisha.
Thank you both. I know that I was in a relationship at one point, and someone, we stopped dating for a summer, and then we got back together, and he was so scared to tell me that he ended up becoming diagnosed with HIV over the summer that we didn't date. So when we sat down and talked about it, he was like, I understand if you don't want to be together. And I was like, no, I'm fine. We just need to talk about it. And he like broke down and cried because he didn't think that that was the answer that he was going to get. And I said, I'm fine. I appreciate you telling me and being upfront with me. So how can we continue this relationship? And I just don't think he was ready for that. So I think that took for a second for him to understand. But because we do these conversations, we have these conversations, now more people are aware of having relationships with people who are diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. And I'm hoping that people can understand that it's just a relationship. You're living your daily life. And so I appreciate the conversations that are happening. They are really very important. Before we move on, Chablis, Mary, did you two want to say anything on the subject of what we're on right now?
Did you want to go first, Mary?
Yeah, I'll go really quick. When I found out I was positive, the few years before that, I started doing a form of drag, and my main focus on fundraising was the Lifelong AIDS Alliance and the HIV movement. And so when I found out I was positive, it was a total life changer for me in so many ways. I thought it was a death sentence. I literally was telling all my friends goodbye. And I was just totally devastated because I was sick. I had spent 5 days in the hospital, seroconverting, which is a big word you all may hear, but that is basically when the virus takes hold of your body. And I was sick. And then I found that I was positive, and I started telling people. And I know I told one of my best friends, and his response was, "Oh my God, I thought you were going to tell me you were dying." But in my mind, I was. It also is one of those things. So I am a recovering alcoholic, and I use alcohol to cover a lot of the pain I have because of my diagnosis, because of the shame I had. But life moves on and life changes, and you take your pills and you become healthy.
Thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate it. And thank you for, opening up as well about your past as well. Shubli.
So my story is a little bit different. I was in the same boat you was, London. I ended up dating a guy. I met him on a cruise ship. We dated. He lived in Seattle. I lived in Minneapolis at the time. Um, he told me, I didn't know he was HIV positive until the worst day in the world he could have told me this was on Christmas Day. It was like, hello, Merry Christmas. I got something to tell you. He told me that. And so I remember that whole day as if it was yesterday, I was scared to death because I didn't know exactly anything about people who are HIV positive. I got a chance to come up here, visit him. He allowed me to come to his doctor's appointments. I got a chance to talk with the doctor because we're in a relationship. I asked many questions to the doctors. And I think that got me more educated to know a little bit more about HIV and those, how do you contract it and how to stay safe. Since that time period, I've been more of an activist for those who are HIV positive. So now I sit on the Department of Health's board to talk about the funding aspect to make sure that money is going into the right places. And as people are aware right now in Washington State, HIV rates have gone down, but it has not gone down within the people of color community. So those rates are still up there. So I'm one of those people that go out and talk about where this money going, how come we're only getting a certain amount going here, what can we do to educate more in that community? And so those are things that I work on now since being part of this whole HIV arena. And so that's where my life changed at. And it basically just changed from dating someone to now being more involved in it as much as possible, which anybody can get involved in it, to put more work into it. Because I think if we have every single person in this world concentrate more on that area, I think we'll see, the deal right now is we want to end HIV by 2030. That's across the board. That's in all the countries out there now. But the only way to do it is that we can get everybody involved in it. Then that's how we can get it to work. So.
What are some steps do you think are there resources for people, and how can this an off-topic question is how can people sign up to help, and what can they do to help besides being here in this chat, listening to us talk about how we can help, and like how can they help? Are there resources, or are there specific resources that you could think of maybe?
Yeah, I mean, there's always you can go to your local AIDS organization that's working in that area to talk with them and see what kind of work can be done. I mean, there's always, like you guys are now raising money, fundraising. We have AIDS walks that goes on every single year. I mean, there's so many things to get involved in, and we don't have to wait until December 1st when it's AIDS World Day to do this. We can do this every single day. One of the things I complain about right now is that, we talk about education. There was so much talk about when the virus came out for COVID. If we had that same type of media coverage where they talk about AIDS and HIV and where we're at today and where people are at, people would get more aware of what's happening. Right now, the only time we ever talk about anything, we talk about it when it's at a pandemic mode and we're in this crisis. But we should be talking about this every single day, because if we talk about it every day, people will educate themselves more each day. We don't have to have people who have stigma towards those who are HIV positive. That's just the bottom line. It's just need to be talked about more. And that's with anything, people with diabetes, people with cancer, people with all kinds of stuff. We just need to have more talk about health than to talk about Trump or other people that are out there. We just need to talk about people's health.
I appreciate that. So kicking off our next subject, and Shubli, I'm going to come right back to you, and then I'll go around again to everybody. And again, we have about 5-10 more minutes before we start opening questions for the audience.
Sure.
As well. But what changes have been made to prevent the spread of HIV and AIDS? You just mentioned medicine, but I know that was an important question that we all wanted to talk about.
The Stop HIV and AIDS, one of the biggest things that we're doing now is that our organization has always focused back in the 1980s when we talked about those who are HIV positive and to stop them from getting AIDS. That was based on medication. Now, as Geisha mentioned earlier, PrEP. PrEP is one of the biggest things now is that, and this would prevent people from spreading this virus around. That's definitely the number one thing. Now, STIs is completely different. That's a whole different subject we have to talk about later. But when it comes to prevention work would be based on getting people to get on PrEP, especially those that are high risk, who are very sexually active. Those are the people that we need to start focusing on, and that's how we can actually stop the spread of HIV.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to add to that?
I would say that being HIV and having my HIV medications requires me to be 100% adherent to my drug regimen. It is the same with PrEP. You can't just take one pill and go, oh, okay, I'm good, or take one pill today and one pill 3 weeks from now and go, oh, okay, I'm good. You have to build it up into your system. You have to keep it in your system and keep it, present in your body for it to have any effect whatsoever, just like my HIV meds. I can't take one a day and 2 weeks from now and go, oh, I'm undetectable. That's not how it works. So, that part of that education process is making sure people are adherent to their program, make sure they're adherent to the regimen, and also, being healthy. Again, HIV attacks your immune system. So, making healthy choices, eating healthy, vitamins, stuff like that. Those all contribute to, supporting the PrEP medication and supporting the HIV medications overall.
The other thing I would add along with, your medical regimen is I think just continuing to normalize and having open conversations and dialogues. When I look back, I'm turning 51 in January, and I think looking back, the 80s, 90s, the LGBT community, the mission was HIV/AIDS. And then in the 2000 aughts to maybe the 2010s, it was same rights, equal rights, equality, marriage equality for everyone. And then now it seems, and which is fantastic, because I look at somebody like London, your generation, as well as maybe a lot of your viewers, it is, the understanding about sexual identity as well as gender identity. That seems like the next movement for this LGBT community. But I think it also does need to be having that balance of what HIV/AIDS is, and continue to have conversations so we don't have these stigmatization or stigmas that come out, or these, I don't know, or these. I've always said, if we continue to have more public people that are in the media and have platforms come out about their status, that it's almost back in I believe it was in the 90s when Magic Johnson came out, right?
Right.
And that he's the very first, on top of that, a very, athlete, so very, macho, masculine man, African-American community came out about his status. And I think that as we continue to have people not be so afraid, we'll continue to break down the fears and the walls that this status or stigma still continues to have.
Just to add what you're saying too, I would love to see the fact when people walk up to somebody who is getting ready to have been a sexual encounter with somebody and they said, I'm HIV positive. The first thing you say to them, so what is your status? You say undetected. That means you're safe. If people were starting to, and that's where the education comes in at, that people need to talk about it more so they know exactly. Right now, I'm guarantee you right now, if somebody walks up, you can walk up to somebody who knows nothing about HIV and you says, yep, I'm HIV positive, they will run, basically, because they're thinking more of the spread of it and I'm going to get it, instead of thinking, well, this person has been taking care of themselves, taking their medication, they're undetected. You cannot get it. That once they're undetected, you will not get it. There's not enough in the system for you to get HIV. And that's the things that we need to start educating people more on.
I think it comes down to, I'm taking care of me so I can take care of you.
Exactly.
That is
That's exactly it.
Exactly.
For anyone
Right.
able to disclose anything in their life, regardless if it's their HIV status or any other medical things or their history or their past traumas, anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Exactly.
And I mean, just to kind of piggyback off of what Geisha said of how we've had these time frames where we've just focused on certain things in the LGBTQ community. I think now it's time to just basically tell everybody, remind everyone there's room at the table for all these conversations to be simultaneously happening and see where they cross over. Is not just that we're gonna focus on this right now. And there was times that I firmly believe our main focus needed to be on certain things. Marriage equality, we needed to focus on that. We needed to have the same rights as everyone else. But I think we're at the time right now with the age research where it's at and the drugs, and we have marriage equality, and we're not going to be fired at work for coming out as gay or trans. I think now we just need to focus on just tell everyone there's room for all these conversations. Let's have them all, and let's figure out where they overlap.
Yeah. I want to also say, like, having conversations like you all mentioned are very important. And I want to give a huge thanks. I know this is like, we're doing Stream Queens Con, and so for some of you all, this is digital and you've never really done this before, but without a doubt, hands down, Stream Queens Con said yes to having this panel with no questions asked. So we really want to thank them for having this conversation, because it just gives more of a platform for people trying to make sure that we stop the stigma, we stop and we spread the word of conversations of what we're doing here today. So again, thank you, Stream Queens Con, for doing this. We have time for about 3 more questions as well. Again, I really appreciate you all being here. I cannot say thank you enough. We have raised $542. I'm going to say that we better raise $60 more by the end of this panel, or I'm going to, and I will snatch my wig off on the internet, which I already have done multiple times. But if you want to see it again, please let's raise money to get to $600. It'd be really greatly appreciated. My last couple questions that I have for you all, and if you don't know the answer to this, that's totally fine. It was just something that I thought was important, just in case. Oh, we have a new goal of 750. I'm so sorry. Let's raise our goal to 750. Please, if you raise at least $100 here, I will snatch my lashes and my wig off. Doing silly things to raise money. I know a lot of these people on this panel don't want that to happen. But I also want to raise money for charity, so I will do what needs to be done. Please and thank you.
I love how Shabli and Geisha are shaking their heads no, and
don't do it.
Devin and I are like, let's raise the money. Let's raise the money.
Yeah, let's raise the money. Let's donate.
Now, donate now.
HIV symptoms. I want to ask, what are symptoms of HIV? I know they may be different in everybody. Everybody is different. And HIV symptoms, do they differ in men and women? If you don't know, it's totally fine. I just thought I would ask this panel today what that may look like.
So, I just wanted to start off really quick with this and just be totally transparent with everyone. I brought up this question from the list we have beforehand because I don't know. I've been living with this infection for years now, and there's stuff that I'm learning every day still. So I'm going to pass this to my other cohorts on here and learn like everyone else.
So I can say this much is that, and I believe I have this right since I'm not a provider, is that getting HIV really does not have a symptom. Is when you get below that count, then you start to see symptoms that may come up with what Debit had talked about earlier. But it's it really does not have a symptom. It's a very sneaky disease. So basically, just knowing the main thing is, if you know you've been in an unprotected sex, if you've been on if you haven't been sexually unprotected, then you know the next thing to do is to go in and get tested. And to add that on there, you can't go and get tested, have unprotected sex today, and decide to go and get tested tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. There's an incubation period that has to happen before the virus even comes up into your system. And I believe that's about 90 days before that even comes up. So
a couple of things. One, it could be 90 days. It could be 2 years. Your body can store the HIV virus into your system, and it can lay dormant. I will say that most people who become HIV positive when they seroconvert, it usually is a bang against the head fever that is usually like 103. You're fatigued, you're really, really tired. When I seroconverted, I took myself to the hospital because it was that bad. Like I didn't know what was going on. And you know, I had 103 temperature, and you know, I was sweating profusely and extremely tired and fatigued, and that was when I was diagnosed with HIV. So everyone seroconverts differently, but on average, it's you know, some of the symptoms you see are when you seroconvert are high temperature, fatigue, tired, and whatnot. To doing a little research, I did look up that one of the main differences between men and women with regards to HIV is that women have harder menstrual cycles. It is harder for them. They're more prone to yeast infections. And there was one other one, and I forgot what it was, but the information I found was on the AHF website. You can just do a search. What is the difference?
Yeah, so everybody's body is different, and so that's the main thing. I understand, you know, getting information, Debit, you know, about being dormant for 2 years, but the main thing is that according to what the CDC is that within a 3-month period, you should know they should be able to see where you if you are positive or not positive. That's just that's the main thing. So and when it comes to women, as we asked that question about women, again, women's body is completely different. I haven't really seen the study that shows that it's a different virus in a woman than it is in a male. What I have seen though is that the protection of women when it comes to like breastfeeding, but here in the United States, people who are HIV positive do not breastfeed. But again, as I mentioned earlier, before we got on here, you take someone that's over in Africa, they have to breastfeed because of the way the economy is over in that area. So, you know, I've always fought the fact of asking, why can't women breastfeed if they can do it there? It has no effect on the child. Why can't we do it here? But it's something to do with some weird law that they have. But again, everybody's body is different. That's the main thing. And so that's what we have to go by.
Keisha, is there anything that you wanted to add on to this?
One thing I would say is, you know, in terms of physical side effect, I didn't have anything, but it is the mental and the emotional toll. And I think, especially Shabli and I were talking a little bit, coming from, you know, the API community, where you don't talk about sex, you don't talk about your status, you don't talk about things that are emotional, you don't show emotion in the API community. You know, you put your head down, you do everything your parents tell you, and you overachieve and repeat. So I think that the biggest thing I would say would be just to make sure that if you do find out that you are positive and it's new diagnosis, or someone comes out to you, that you are asking them, you know, how can I be there for you, or you're getting the help that you need. And there is thankfully so many resources now that it's not so scary and not so alone. I know that, you know, some of your viewers may live in rural areas or other places that may not be as open as a city like Seattle, but there is, you know, hopefully support groups that they can find online, or, you know, help calls centers, things like that, that might be able to give them the support. Because I think the emotional support when getting a diagnosis is just as hard as maybe a physical one.
Yeah, and one more thing, just to add on that, I'm glad you mentioned it. If you do, if any individual find out that, I mean, they've had some unprotected sex, and you have unprotected sex, make sure you get to a clinic or a doctor or an organization and get on PEP. What is PEP? PEP is almost like the morning after pill. Basically, you go in, you take this pill for a week, it stops the HIV, period.
Got it. PEP, not PrEP, but PEP.
Not yeah. PrEP is PrEP is prevention, and PEP is basically you have a 72-hour window to make sure you can stop it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Again, I'm learning every day. I'm also being very aggressively informed that we've raised $100. So I'm so sorry to all the professional people on this panel, but I fear that I have to take my wig off. However, I'm wearing a beret, but I look sickening without a wig on.
So exactly where are you at right now? Like, is that $750?
No, but we can raise. We're at $662.
Yeah.
We raised $100, so I'm gonna do this on here. So let's become bald. However, I'm gonna do it like this, and you're not gonna see anything, and I'm just gonna come back like this. No, okay, here we are. No wig on. So thank you everybody for donating. I'm gonna put this back on. But we have a couple questions. We have about 10 more minutes, and I want to make sure we respect time as well. Again, we did raise money for charity today, which is really great towards AMFAR. We've been raising money for AMFAR about 2 years now. In the chat of our call, if you look over there, I'll give you like a couple seconds. We did have 2 questions come in. Again, if anybody has any questions for anybody, you can reach out to any of these people privately as well while I give them to look at that. We're going to give them a couple seconds to look at these questions. I think we may have time for just one. And it's probably going to be, what are some ways your community has uplifted you in your experience with HIV and AIDS? Again, what are some ways your community has uplifted you in your experience with HIV and AIDS? It doesn't have to be personal. It could just be, what are some ways that you've seen our community raise awareness and uplift others with experience of HIV and AIDS? I do agree with Geisha. We obviously all live in the same city, and everybody knows where I live. So, but we are such a very thankful. We live in such a thankful area for the most part because we have the resources. We live in a bigger city. However, we do this panel because there are people in areas that don't get to talk about, that are people of color, different walks of life that are suffering in silence. So we want to uplift you by having this panel to make sure that you know that there are resources, there are ways to talk about it. If anybody's going through any experiences that they are unable to reach out about. So again, thanks for having this panel, but I do want to know personally, I do want to know what are some ways that the community, aka the Seattle community, other communities that you're a part of, has uplifted your experience. We'll start it off with Mary, and then we'll go around to Geisha, Debit, and Shabli.
Gosh, honestly, that question is really like emotional for me, and brings me back to when I found that I was positive, and I went to my home bar and like started to tell my friends. Like I said before, I thought it was a death sentence for me, and just to think of how the community surrounded me, and how people I had known literally were like there for me, and people offering to go to doctor's appointments with me, and people offering me their doctor's numbers, and folks who I didn't even know were positive coming out, letting me know that they've been positive for X amount of years. And just that how as the LGBTQ community, we went through such tragedy in the 80s and 90s of our friends passing away, that now we just surround someone when they do come out with, if they do come out with this. So yeah, it brings back a lot of memories, and a lot of good memories. Geisha.
I say it's given me hope. I mean, even though the world is not always perfect and so much of everything is about timing and resources, looking at the generations after me, looking at people that I meet, that are in their 20s and 30s, and how active and how bold and how fearless they are. It gives me hope that, to Chablis' point, we will find a cure for this, by 2030. And that we do have a lot more resources than we did even 10 to 20 to 30 years ago. So I think that is the one thing, along with our gender and sexual expressions and being minorities that way, that it has brought our community together.
I would say that. So my first few years, because of my life choices, I wasn't really supported by my community because I was doing drugs. But when I moved to Seattle in 2009, and I got clean and sober, and me being active in my communities and becoming part of organizations that do that kind of work is what really supported me. And so being out in the community, doing the work in the community allowed me to be supported by my community. I think that that's really, really important. I think that's why all five of us still do, well, there's four of you, there's one of me, the work that we do. I was counting screens, I'm sorry. Do the work that we do because we know how important it is for the marginalized and the BIPOC community and the trans community to continue doing the work that we do, and we continue showing up and being present and telling our stories because we've had the luxury of being supported. So we now want to support those who don't have that luxury.
We have tons of nonprofit organizations that are out there reaching out with the community. I mean, there's a lot of work that's out there. We've got, just to name a few, Lifelong. We've got Spokane People of Color Against AIDS Network, Entre Hermanas. We've got so many different organizations that's doing the work that is out there. We also have our local bars who are letting information go up when people come out and stuff like that. So our community is doing a lot of work here, especially within the Seattle area. We're working every day. We're very hard and working every single day. And Geisha brought on a good point. Again, as much as we work and harder we're working, and that's nationwide, we will stop this virus by 2030. It's already getting there right now, and it's going to happen. And so, yeah. And I'm extremely, working in this field again for 15 years. I'm extremely incredible happiness to see the changes that are being made. It's so many changes, and again, they're more worried now about not people being HIV positive. We're more worried about people living long, way long. We're in the area now where people are going to be in their 100 years old, and so now they have to figure out how to control that. But it's just we're at that level now that we're doing really well, and we continue to do well as long as people stay healthy and be safe.
Be safe. Be safe. That is all the time we have right now for our panel, and I really appreciate not only as an Empress to invite other past monarchs, aka Empresses, and court members and title holders, Imperial Princess, to our panel today. This meant a lot to me. I don't think you all understand, including all of you, to be here. So thank you. I know we're in a very busy time with doing other things. I stare at Geisha as I have a lot of things for you. But I appreciate it. Where can everybody find you all? I know that you all maybe have an open door policy to be reached out to. I'm sure there are people who would love to talk to you or further watch your careers in and out of the drag community world and whatever you do, leather community, drag community. So we will start with Brian, aka Mary Lubalot. Where can we find you? What are you doing next?
You can find me on both Facebook and Instagram. Search for my name, Brian Steen. What am I doing next? God only knows. Yeah, I think if I even mention running for another title, both of my aunts are gonna kill me with the hell I stuck them through my Emperor's year. But find me, reach out if you need someone to talk to, if you need someone to go to your appointments with you on video chat, I'm here.
I know someone also mentioned, Mary, that they loved your Christmas decorations. One of our drag artists on the team loves your Christmas background. Geisha, where can we find you?
You can find me at GAYSHASTARR on both Instagram and Facebook. Other than doing some trans advocacy, I have the arduous task of producing London Step Down in February as she steps down as the 50th Empress. So that will be keeping me busy in the next couple of months.
And I thank you for doing that. If you have never had your phone be rung by Geisha, answer it at all times. Don't ignore her. We love her. I also, Geisha, someone said Geisha for president, and Geisha stays to be the prettiest woman alive. That is from Jenny Rader. Debit, where can we find you, bestie?
You can find me on Twitch at Boy Debit. You can find me on Instagram at Debitography. And then on Facebook under Joshua Nelson.
Awesome. And Lady Chablis?
What am I doing next? I will be in bed watching White Lotus because that's one of the best shows I've ever seen. And I am so into it right now, so I can't wait to get off this. But anyway, you can find me on Facebook, also on Twitter, under Lady Chablis, spelled Ladie Chablis. Also, you could, if you want to get in contact with me through my office, you can contact the AIDS Health Foundation. That's AHF, AIDS Health Foundation, in the Seattle area. So
awesome. Thank you all. Again, I'm Lennon Bradshaw, Twitch's first Black drag partner. I'm happy to have this panel here every year as long as possible. Thank you, Stream Queens Con, for having us. Up next is Kings of the Internet, which is an all drag king panel. So please stay for that. If you want to finish that goal of $750, that'd be greatly appreciated. And we'll see you next time, y'all. All right. Bye-bye.